the problem you're facing right now in these challenging times is the question, is an MBA still worth it, or is it relevant? And because on one hand, business management seems to be intensively knowledge-based as ever in history. Data-driven decision-making, advanced financial management, ever more complex leadership challenges in the era of massive social and generational changes, ever more complex strategic and political picture, and expectations for companies to take a more active role in solving the world's key social and environmental challenges. But on the other hand, there is just so much uncertainty these days. Just think about the last decade. In 2008, we had the biggest financial crisis since the 1930s. In 2015, we had, at that time, the largest refugee crisis in Europe in decades, now obviously overshadowed by an even bigger one. In 2020, the largest pandemic in a century that started in 2020, and it's still ongoing. And today, we are witnessing the biggest war in Europe since World War II. And these changes are part of a much broader set of transformation that is taking place. Some of them are positive, and some of them are pretty dangerous. And the key question is, how do we as business professionals, how do you as business professionals prepare for this challenging and uncertain environment? And the obvious question is an MBA the way to do it? We've seen an explosion of online education over the last 2 years, and I will show you why we believe our MBA is worth it. So if you're interested in further education, you usually start reaching for the stars, looking for the best business schools out there because you deserve the best education out there, and you're looking for the best education out there. And the leading business schools are mostly located in the US. We all know those Ivy League universities or universities in California, and where you want to take the MBA. But let me show you some characteristics of the MBA programs at these leading business schools. First of all, their MBA programs are pretty much mission-driven. They are differentiated and offer a certain expertise or a certain perspective or a set of values at these business schools. Another advantage of these business schools is that their faculty is, of course, has top credentials and is coming from around the world. So you would be taught by top faculty with an international background. As I already mentioned, the international background of faculty and lecturers, the same argument applies to the student body. You at those business schools, you would be in a group with people coming from around the world, thanks to the reputation and thanks to the full-time format of these programs. But these programs, of course, they offer a campus experience that we know from American college movies, because education is more than just a university building. It's more than just knowledge transfer. It's about the university experience, the learning experience, and it's about a sense of belonging and being part of a broader community with these universities. But of course, these leading business schools come with a set of disadvantages. Let's start with the most striking disadvantage, the tuition, because these leading business schools, their tuition starts at a tuition of 120,000 euro of tuition. Of course, it does not include any other expenses like cost of living or traveling or relocating your family. Some of these programs, because of the full-time format, require you to leave your job for at least a year. Some programs even require you to leave your job for 2 years, which is another financial burden for you and your family as well. And of course, it means there's work disruption. You're away from your job. You're missing networking. You're missing expertise. You're missing your industry and your company environment for at least a year, sometimes even 2 years. And another disadvantage that is linked to this translocation is you might need to relocate your family as well, because with the full-time format, it's unlikely that your family, your partners and your kids are going to stay in the city you live while you're moving somewhere else. So if this frightens you off, you usually start for programs to look for programs in the city you live in, because you want to be closer to your family, you want to be closer to your job, you're looking for a cheaper option. And what you tend to find in these local MBA programs is a so-called plain vanilla MBA curriculum. What does it mean? Those local programs don't offer a certain set of perspective or expertise, and they don't have any mission or any values. In these local programs, also the faculty is pretty much local. So you would be taught by teachers, by professors and lecturers coming from the city, from that country, or the region at most. But it's not really an international setting. And the same argument applies to the student body. In these regional programs that we can find basically anywhere in Europe, in basically every major city in Europe, you would be in a class with mostly national students, maybe regional, transnational students, but it's not going to be an international experience. A big advantage of these programs is, of course, that because of their lacking reputation, they are cheaper than the leading business schools that you have found in the first place. So these local MBA programs start at 80,000 euro of tuition, of course, not including any other expenses like cost of living, etc. But another strong advantage of these local programs is that there is no work disruption. Since you're already in the city or in the region where the MBA takes place, you can actually stay on your job and just commute to these bi-weekly residencies easily, because you live in that area already. So we at CEU offer the best of these two worlds. First of all, there is no work disruption, thanks to the practical and flexible modular format. I will talk about the program later in this presentation. Another huge advantage of the CEU Executive MBA is that the Executive MBA is mission-driven. I will talk about the Executive MBA for the Open World philosophy later. We have an international student body because of the modularity of the program. Actually, we are the second most international university in the world. And this fact is being reflected in the student body, of course, but also with regard to faculty and guest lecturers. So you would be in a truly international setting, not only with regard to your fellows in your class, but also with regard to faculty teaching you. And speaking of faculty, all of our faculty members are coming from the best universities in the world. They have top credentials, are coming from the best universities that basically you started your research on, like Harvard, Berkeley, Stanford, Yale, Princeton, MIT, etc. And another very huge argument for CEU Executive MBA is that the Executive MBA is mission-driven. I will talk about the mission later. And that tuition is only 29,000 euro. Just compare it to the research you've done so far, that we have done so far together. It's a huge difference to other MBA programs. And there's a reason for this low competition, for this low tuition. I will talk about this reason later in this presentation. So when we say world-class faculty, we really mean it. I want to give you an overview of the faculty that we invite to teach your modules. It's just an overview. I'm not going to present all the faculty members to you. For example, here, Professor Isusenius, an expert on marketing and emotional marketing with a PhD from the University of Central Florida. Or Mark Kaufmann for economics. Mark Kaufmann is an expert in applied theory with a PhD degree from Harvard. Joy Chan, she's if you're new to finance, you will be placed in the beginners track in finance, and she's just a uniquely gifted educator. Generation after generation of our students tell us how she's just unique in explaining complex financial concepts. Or Professor Adam Zawodowski, he will teach your advanced track course in finance. If you're already experienced in finance, you'll be placed in the track with him. And he's a leading expert on complex financial investments with a PhD degree from Princeton. Or Luca Keresteschi, she's a practitioner. She's an expert on data, and she's coming from McKinsey, and she's an expert on industry digitalization, and she will teach your courses on big data management. The course on big data, speaking of big data, the course on big data and artificial intelligence will be taught by Professor Miklós Koren, one of the leading scholars in the field in Europe with a Harvard PhD. Or Luther with a PhD degree from London School of Economics. She's an expert on the future of work, which includes topics like artificial intelligence, automation, and robotics. She will also teach your classes. For leadership, Austin, our world-class psychologist with executive education experience on 4 continents, he will lead the way. Of course, I want to introduce some of our visiting faculty also to you, just to give you an impression of the guest lecturers and the visiting faculty that we're going to invite to teach your classes, to show you the academic excellence that we offer in your courses. For example, Professor Christian Zelos, he's an expert on innovation coming from the Innovation University, Stanford University, or Professor Miklós Savary, an expert on digital marketing from Columbia University. Professor Omar Hernandez, he's an expert on operations management from Berkeley Haas Business School. He just taught in the March module here in Vienna, and it's a very zeitgeist, a very current topic, as you can imagine, because of the situation in Ukraine and the situation in China with the lockdowns. The supply chain and operations management was a very current topic. To browse further, Professor Hui Chen from the University of Zurich or Paula Caproni from the University of Michigan are also going to teach your classes. So here's what the program looks like. It's a 9-module program, as you can see, and the dates you can see on the screen right now are not going to change. So you can basically plan your studying around professional and family activities based on these dates. As you can see, we have 2 modules in the first year, 4 in the second year, and 3 in the last year, which gives you flexibility and balance in your life. As you might have noticed around the dates, we are piggybacking around popular European holidays like November 1st, May 1st, or August 15th, when it's easier for you to take time off your job and actually attend our modules besides your job. In the summers, which is the center column, our bespoke and cutting-edge leadership program takes place in Budapest, and you'll have the opportunity to benefit from electives from the faculty in the world we invite to teach your classes. So one day, there will come the day when you finish with us and join the CEU alumni from around the world. As I already said, CEU is the 2nd most international university in the world, and you can rely on an active elite network on every continent. An active elite network of more than 18,000 professionals around the world. We have city-level chapters, we have country-level chapters. Basically, wherever you are in the world, you will find CEU alumni to interact with. And this is a network that you can really count on, and one of the key assets that we have. So the question is, how are we even able to offer such a high-quality program at only 29,000 euros? The answer lies in our benefactor and founder, George Soros, who created CEU with the mission to promote open society. Just recently, George Soros made another contribution to CEU's mission by offering another $1 billion in endowment to create the Open Society University Network. Yes, you heard right, another $1 billion, billion with a B, to create the Open Society University Network, which means we are the best endowed university in Europe. So what does the Executive MBA for the open world mean? What makes CEU so unique compared to other programs? First of all, when we talk about open world, we mean skepticism towards dogmas, towards hierarchies, and privileges, both in context of how we teach, but also with in composition of the cohort. For us, diversity is key to creating a successful program and not just an empty marketing catchphrase. Secondly, we believe in debate and radical rational thinking. Every idea can be challenged. We believe in facts and arguments rather than narratives and fake news, because it's fake news and narratives that create polarization in our societies these days. And we believe the best way to challenge this narrative-based discourse is to make arguments based on facts and realities, which is the hallmark of Karl Popper's definition of open societies. We're fundamentally opposed to all kinds of discrimination, and we actively promote diversity within our program. The way we finance the scholarship means we create opportunities for people who traditionally have not been able to actually join this program or join programs like this, because they're underrepresented on the business and executive levels in our societies. It's about redistribution of power and open access to opportunity for underprivileged groups with these scholarships. And we see managers not just as people who deal with businesses and resources, but we also believe that managers go beyond that. They're positive change agents. No matter what your professional background is, if you're coming from the corporate world, if you're working in an NGO, if you're in the public sector, if you're an entrepreneur, if you're in human rights, or if you're in engineering or in culture and arts, you can contribute to open societies in your very position and be a positive change agent. So what does the CEU Executive MBA classroom look like? Currently, we have 65 managers with an average of 14 years of work experience, including a minimum of 3 years of managerial/leadership experience. As you can see from the background image, we use state-of-the-art classroom technology and setups in order to facilitate lively discussion and interaction in class. We make use of case-based learning rather than traditional lectures that you would find in those local MBA programs. And we want to take you, experts in your very field, in your specific field, from this level of functional expertise to the strategic level. I encourage everybody to attend our modules on site because it's just a better learning experience. And to be honest, it's just more fun. I mean, let's be real about it. If you're here on campus, engaging with your fellows, having lunch breaks together, going out in the evenings, having coffee breaks together, this is really where the networking starts. But if traveling is inconvenient for you, if you don't want to travel, if you cannot travel, every participant can choose to join online, of course. It's a hybrid format. So if traveling is inconvenient for you, you can join online our modules as well. In order to facilitate the highest quality in class for this online experience, we have invested heavily in studio-grade microphones, capturing not only the lecturers, of course, but also other participants in class, those here on site, but also those online. That's why we also invested in large screens and high-quality cameras that the participants here on Vienna campus can see the large screens live right now, and of course in high-quality cameras capturing all the debate entries in class. We have created physical virtual breakout rooms for support teams. You can see those support teams, those physical breakout rooms on the left image right now. Let me tell you something about the support teams. The support teams are basically your teams where you are engaged with group work, working on group presentations, group papers, etc. But there's a special twist to them. It's not just about group work. You will be exposed to as much diversity as possible within these support teams. We are hand selecting these support teams in order to proactively expose you to diversity. You will not be placed in a support team with people coming from the same industry, the same company, the same linguistic background, or the same country. So you will be placed in a very diverse setting, because this is where the learning experience really kicks in, and this is where the benefit of diversity really kicks in. When you're about to listen to your fellows with different approaches of solution making, of team building, of solution making, this is where the learning really kicks in. If you would be in a group with people, like-minded people from the same industry or even the same company, you would basically listen to stories that you already know. There's nothing new for you to learn. But listening to the stories of people who are completely different to your background, this is where the diversity benefit really kicks in. And we have created personalized virtual backgrounds. As you can see on that image, there's a color code, so you can at one side see who belongs to which group and who's saying what. So you can perfectly see if somebody mentions something in a debate entry in class, you can perfectly see who said what in class. And there's a special twist, which why this is important. We do 360-degree peer feedback. So you're not just assessing, you're not giving feedback, you're not only receiving feedback from your lecturers, you will be also receiving feedback from your fellows in class, and vice versa. You will be giving feedback to your fellows in class as well. So the quality of your debate entries matters in this executive MBA. And of course, at every level that you're with us on your intellectual journey, you deserve and you will get high quality individual support. From the level of inquiring about the program, to actually applying for the program, to enrolling into the program, being a participant, becoming an alumni, being an alumni, you deserve and you will get high quality individual support. Tuition is €29,000. We do offer financial support. We do offer scholarships and empowerment fellowships. And tuition is for the whole program and includes all the credits of 2 years. As I already mentioned, there's an online option for you. You can participate easily online if you want to, if traveling is inconvenient, for example. And there's another goodie that we negotiated is that we have negotiated discount rates with partner hotels in Vienna and Budapest. So you will receive discount rates for a selection of hotels ranging from the budget level to luxury level. Of course, there's no obligation to stay at these hotels. It's just a recommendation and discount rates that you could make use of. And we have you will be benefiting from travel arrangements that we have negotiated. We have negotiated discount rates for flights with Lufthansa Group and Austrian Airlines, which will bring you to Vienna and Budapest at a discounted rate in order to defray your other costs of this program. So we invite you to join the open world. The application deadline is June 12th. I know it's very short notice, but if you start your online application in these days, you can submit and complete your application even after June 12th. I will consider those applications too, because you started your applications before June 12th. The application starts online on our website. Everything is done fully digital, so no need to send in any hard copy versions of documents right now. You can do your application online from wherever you are, basically. I strongly encourage you to apply as soon as possible, because we have a first come, first served policy. So the sooner you apply, the sooner you're able to reserve your study seat. Of course, at any time, you're invited to book an individual one-on-one consultation with me. to discuss your questions or to optimize your application or to discuss financial support and the scholarship options for you. The link has just been shared in the chat box. Feel free to book a one-on-one consultation if you have not so far. So I think it's one thing to hear about the program from us from the program office, but let's listen to people who have already applied for the program and have already been accepted to the program. And I'm very happy that we have one participant tonight here. It's Evelina Atanosova-Genshev, who happens to be in Vienna. She's based in Bulgaria, if I remember correctly. And she's here live on campus. And Evelina, if you could please join me here on the stage and have a conversation with me. I'm really thankful that you're here tonight, and it's just a funny coincidence that you're here these days. So thank you for coming.
You may say that there are coincidences. Hey, good to see you.
Well, it's a pleasure to finally get to know you and to see you, because we have only met digitally so far in the application process.
I'm from this that started the application online.
Perfect. So if you could just start with an online introduction, like who are you? What is your professional background?
I'm Evelina. All my friends call me Eva. And actually, my background is marketing. In the last 20 years, I'm doing strategic marketing and growth marketing, managing few companies. Actually, I have 3 companies, and also supporting my clients to make the digital transformation of their companies. Never got actually the opportunity to dedicate my time on education, although I've developed so many businesses and companies. And the Central European University actually provides me this opportunity finally to have my time and to do it properly, to build my educational basis, and of course to build up on that.
So I do have a sense that you are already a leader. You're already an executive. You just mentioned 3 companies that you're running, but I guess you want to become a better leader. That's why you applied for the Executive MBA. Or what is your motivation for?
Sure, because if you haven't studied how to become a manager, how to become a leader, it's not something that you can just do by itself. So you have to learn how to do it. You have to learn how to manage the processes, and what we have spoken during my application process, to step back from the operational work, managing your company, and really to be more focused on the strategic approach and the strategic leadership. So this was exactly what I was looking for, and this was my goal applying for the program.
And I guess, well, I don't want to patronize your arguments, but I guess the argument that there is no work disruption helped you, because you're a busy leader. You're running 3 companies. I guess you would be able to join a full-time or even part-time program where you would need to travel like every 2 or 3 weeks.
It will be hard. It will be hard. Honestly, the online opportunity to participate in the program was some of my greatest priorities, and it was how you want me. And then the tailored curriculum, because the Executive MBA is not like the traditional MBA. It's not like going back to school to be focused only on the education. You have to do it in between all the thousands tasks. So having the opportunity to participate online and really to adapt the classes according to my schedule was like everything that I was looking for.
And you just mentioned the program. When I showed the program chart, I want to actually mention the modules. You are going to have modules on leadership, of course. We have 3 modules on leadership solely of these 9 modules, and the other modules deal with financial management, managing operations strategically, marketing, the bigger picture, data management, innovation, entrepreneurship, crisis management,
which is actually quite a point right now.
I mean, good point. And you do have some background regard to open society values too, because you're a woman leader and you are running women empowerment organizations in Bulgaria. If you could tell us something more about that spirit as well.
It's back to forth actually. So if you're born an entrepreneur, then you are an entrepreneur. So it's like you can't hide from yourself. But at some point I realized that being a female leader and female manager means that in a way you are a role model. Even right now I'm the Bulgarian finalist for the Diversity Role Model Awards of the Central European.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much. But what's more important is if you are a role model, or if people perceive you as a role model, then this is also a responsibility. So you have to keep on track. You have to deserve this honor, because to me it's an honor, and that's why I still invest into my education and continue to invest into developing all my skills and the knowledge, because right now it's also the responsibility. So the female management, the female leadership is a topic. The more to the west you go, it's somehow better developed, because I'm coming from Bulgaria. It's kind of an issue there. But women, so female, they do business differently. So nothing comparable to the way, to the mindset of the male investors, of the male entrepreneurs, and we have to accept this. And also, it's really important when talking about the executive MBA and the executive learning, that you are these who are keeping that in mind. So the approach is completely different, and it's also, so I don't say gender-based, but let's say it's adapted to the females and to the female approach to doing business and building companies.
Let me just add, you mentioned we need to, I think, if I quote you correctly, we need to accept diversity and women perspective. At CEU, we do not merely accept different perspectives and diversity, we cherish them. So we want to have as much diversity in class, not because of marketing reasons, but because they're the perfect foundation for innovation and open society in our open societies these days. So we want to actively bring as much diversity into the program as possible. That's why we have established fellowships for businesswomen in Bulgaria. We have established fellowships for businesswomen in Russia. We have established LGBTIQ fellowships for businesswomen in the MENA region, for managers with a disability, for BAME managers in the UK, just to mention some of them. There's way more fellowships, empowerment fellowships. If you want to get more information about these fellowships, please book a one-on-one consultation with me, and I will be happy to advise you. I mean, thank you for applying for the program. We're happy to having you accepted to the program, and thank you for joining us tonight. I'm moving on to the next part of the evening, unless you want to say something else.
No, I just want to say to everybody who is still thinking, not to overthink it.
Exactly, just do it. I mean,
better do it, because it deserves. So, if I may finish this conversation like this.
Thank you so much. Thank you. The perfect conclusion. I'm moving on to the next part of this evening, and I'm happy to be joined by Professor Maciej Kiszlowski tonight, our faculty director, who is waiting for some questions from the Q&A session, I guess, and I'd be happy to answer your questions from the Q&A session with him together. Thank you for joining us, Maciej. The first question.
Good evening, everybody.
The first question is for the professor in the room, and it's a very typical question from coming from students, and it's about, is there a thesis and are there any exams?
Yes, so there is no thesis, or there is a very CEU approach to thesis, which is, we call it the capstone, and it's not about writing your magnum opus that's going to gather dust on some shelf at the back of your storage, but about actually taking the knowledge that you that we engage you with and applying it into the real world, and applying it in two specific ways. First, we have this strategic analysis component, which is basically an idea of, use pieces of the analytical toolkit that you learn from my distinguished colleague Joseph Akbar, who's a keynote speaker tonight, already in attendance, from finance, from data, from any course, and actually show us that you can solve a real organizational business problem with this. And the second part is the so-called leadership component, where we want you not to analyze, but actually do, lead, mentor somebody, implement. Some people do it in sequence and they do this strategic analysis component and then apply it to the real world. So this is our approach to thesis, but more fundamentally, this is our approach to learning. Theory and the opposite of practice only if it's a bad theory. A really good theory informs practice, makes you think one step ahead. And that's the goal of the program. And that's how we evaluate your progress. That's why on the second part of your question, most of our courses don't have exams, they have projects. And even exams are much more applied. You do them after the module, not, in some room filled with paper and pens. After the module, at the time of your convenience. Most of them are open book because they are not about memorizing anything. It's about applying. It's about helping you solve problems tomorrow, next week, but also very importantly, in a decade. Because a good executive MBA program is not only the program that teaches you how, it's the program that teaches you why. And that's what we strive at CEU Executive MBA.
Thank you very much. The next question, I guess, is for me, or at least I want to answer to it. And it's the question about application requirements and the application procedure. So before we're talking about the application procedure, let's talk about the requirements, because, of course, let's start with the first step. We are looking for people with at least 8 years of work experience from any kind of professional background. Could be culture, could be corporate, could be finance, could be non-finance, could be NGOs. It doesn't matter what your profession is, basically. You can apply for the Executive MBA if you have at least 8 years of work experience and 3 years of managerial/leadership experience. We can make exceptions in both cases, but of course, you would need to explain to us why you would still be eligible for joining such a program, even though you don't have 8 years of work experience or 3 years of leadership experience. Again, we can make exceptions, but you would need to explain it to us and make a case. Another requirement are the documents that you would need to send in, which is a CV, of course, and a motivation letter. The motivation letter, I think it's self-explanatory, should describe your motivation, why you think that CEU Executive MBA is a good fit to your life, and vice versa, why you would be a good fit to the Executive MBA. I think that's a good hint for you to include in the motivation letter. And of course, we would require you to have a undergraduate diploma, at least, from any field of study. Could be politics, could be business, could be the piano, as long as you have an undergraduate diploma or any other university diploma or equivalent. Again, we can make exceptions, and we are happy to make exceptions if you explain us why we should do an exception and why you should be eligible for the program for the Executive MBA still without meeting this requirement. For example, if you have undergone extensive professional vocational training in your company, which is very common in the DACH region, for example, this could be an exception that we can consider. As an American/EU university, we require proof of English because we want to have everybody in class to be able to talk on basically the same language level. And you don't have to present the proof of English at the time of application. So assuming that you're applying today, you don't need to have the proof of English today. You can present it until the very first module in August, which is another huge advantage in your application process. Speaking of the application process itself, the application starts online on our website. You basically create a profile, enter some personal data. You will be asked to upload the documents that I already mentioned. And once you have submitted and completed your application, we'll check it for completeness and correctness. You will have the opportunity to hand in any missing documents or comment on any any documents. And assuming that you meet this formal this stage, you will be invited for an interview done by one of our faculty members. It's an online interview of 45 minutes where we're going to ask you about your leadership style, about your motivation, about your teamwork, and basically that's what we're going to ask. These questions we're going to ask you. We're not going to play any mind games or these funny HR questions. We only have this limited amount of time in order to get to know you, and we try our best to use it wisely in order to get to know you and your motivation. Assuming that you pass the interview phase, your application will be presented to an admissions committee because we're handpicking our participants, and assuming that they approve your application, you will receive an admission decision, a positive admission decision, only in a couple of weeks after you have submitted your application. So on average, it takes us 2 to 3 weeks in order to respond to your application and give you a response to your application if you have been accepted or not. Because you're an executive, you want to plan ahead and you don't have much time on your hands, and you have family to include in your plans. And we acknowledge this, and this is a program that fits your life and not ours. The very last question I would also answer myself, which is about financial support. Is there any financial support? Yes, there is. We're happy to offer financial support. We don't consider scholarships and financial support as charity, but we consider it as investment in your in executive talent and in your future. So if you're interested in scholarships or empowerment fellowships, feel free to use a one-on-one consultation, to book a one-on-one consultation with me, because there's just too many of those scholarships and fellowships to mention them all here. Just to mention a few, we have a need-based scholarship, which takes into consideration your income situation and the country of residence. And we have empowerment fellowships for businesswomen, LGBTIQ managers, BAE managers, etc., etc. Feel free to book a one-on-one consultation with me if you want to have tailor-made advice on financial support and on your application. So without any further ado, I want to move on to the academic highlight of this open day, which is the keynote presentation by Professor Yusuf Akbar. Professor Yusuf Akbar is Associate Professor of Strategy. He has published over 40 journal articles, 4 books, and numerous contributions to academic and professional research in strategy and international business. He's the founding editor of the International Journal of Emerging Markets and an advisor to governmental authorities. His consulting and professional references include Citibank, Deutsche Telekom, Siemens, Texas Instruments, and Toyota. Thank you so much, Yusuf, for joining us tonight. He will be talking on a very, very current topic, which is it time to call on emerging markets? Thank you, Yusuf. The floor is yours.
Thanks very much, Thomas. Good evening, everybody. This presentation is based on a paper that I published in a journal called Critical Perspectives on International Business. And actually, what I'm trying to do in this paper is actually explore why we're also excited about emerging markets, where in fact, there's enough evidence now to suggest that emerging markets are not as important as we actually think they are. And as you can see on the slide here, we got some typical kind of headlines from the press and from sort of research-focused journalism, that sort of looking at the rise of emerging markets, the drivers of the future, which emerging markets to watch. And there's this kind of sense that we should basically be focusing our investment strategies as organizations, as firms, in emerging markets. So, and in many senses, if I'm being self-reflective here, I may be sort of part of the problem myself, and I'll explain why in just a minute. What's interesting is that if you look at data between the year 2000 to 2009, which many people regard as one of the most buoyant and growth-centered periods in economic history, what's interesting is that there is no correlation between long-term real growth in GDP in emerging markets and real equity returns for firms active in emerging markets. So for the 10 years when we were all getting super excited about emerging markets, the GDP growth of these markets, so we're talking about places like Brazil, Russia, India, China, and so on, that doesn't seem to be correlated with the financial returns that firms have gained from investment in these markets. If you go to the next decade, in 8 out of the 10 years between 2010 and 2020, the MSCI Emerging Markets Index, which by most investors is regarded as the gold standard for looking at investment opportunities in developing countries, has underperformed the US S&P 500 index, again suggesting that actually in the second decade of this century, you would have done better if you had put your money in the S&P 500 versus investing in industries, firms, and countries in the developing world. And then lastly, looking at specifically at German data, if you look at several measures of economic development, including things such as GDP per capita, the comparative growth of high income segments between Brazil, Russia, India, China, BRIC, and Germany, German public listed companies' investments in emerging markets don't appear to have outperformed investment in Germany. So among a group of publicly traded German firms, remember, it's very hard to do research on privately held businesses because it's very hard to get data on profitability. So if we just look at that category of publicly traded firms in Germany, they don't seem to have done better by investing in emerging markets than they have done by investing in Germany itself. So that's quite an interesting sort of question mark that we place over this whole concept of emerging markets. Now, if we move to the academic world, which I kind of inhabit, in the top 15 academic journals that have published research on international business and management, so you're looking at the Academy of Management Reviews, Strategic Management Journal, Journal of International Business Studies, and so on, the top ranked journals in the field. In the period 1993 to 2020, there'd been 1,343 peer review papers published in these journals, which explicitly deal with emerging markets, right? And what's interesting, it starts with a trickle of papers in the 1990s, single digits, and it peaked out in 2018 with 184 papers published in these top journals specifically dealing with emerging markets. So on the one hand, we've got this presumption in the business world that emerging markets are producing superior financial returns relative to developed economies, which anecdotal evidence suggests that may not be true. And then you've got this growth in academic scholarship in business and management that focuses on emerging market scholarship. So what's gone wrong here? Why is it that the investment community has kind of bet on emerging markets where the evidence may question that idea, and that academics have really suddenly become very, very interested in writing about emerging markets? What I do in this paper is I kind of use a fairly well-established idea of critical discourse analysis, right? And what this basically contends is that the language we use and the things we discuss, write about, and so-called discourse, obscures power relations and ideologies which are embedded in that discourse. And my paper, I think, focuses mainly on ideologies, right? So there is an ideological presumption that emerging markets and the concept of emerging markets is actually a good idea. But actually, critical discourse analysis would say this ideology promotes and reinforces inequalities between developed and developing countries. And this is a feature, not a bug, right? And so in other words, the investment and scholarly communities have sort of propagated an emerging market discourse for ideological reasons, which actually doesn't actually make any sense. And here's the process. So you basically, you've got three phases here, right? So you've got the written word. So you've got two places where you can read about emerging markets. You know, first up, you've got academic scholarship, right? So you've got people like me who write a lot about this subject and sort of, you know, do research, collect data, and so on. And then you've got the business media and press, right? And to a certain extent, academic scholarship follows the media, but also, I think, crucially, academic scholarship provides an important source of ideas for the business media and press, right? And so a combination of academic scholarship and the business media feeds into phase two, which is the way we teach, which is called discursive interaction and critical discourse analysis. What does that mean? It means that essentially, you know, myself as a professor will bring my research into the classroom. I'll also assign readings from the business media and press, HBR articles, Sloan Management Review, Financial Times, The Economist, and so on. And I bring this into the classroom, and who do I interact with? I interact with business people, because I'm teaching executive education, people that some of you who may join our program will have the opportunity, and rather I'll have the opportunity to work with you. And beyond the kind of teaching and executive education piece, we also create a community of public intellectuals, people who give TED Talks, that go to Davos and participate in these kinds of sort of high profile, very visible summits, right? So that's phase two. So we get you know, the written word interacting in the classroom, in public fora, propagating this idea about emerging markets. And that leads us to phase three. And this is where practice becomes real. First of all, the executives that we interact with in the classroom and beyond make decisions. They make investment decisions based upon what we're talking about. And secondly, public policy makers similarly, you know, who attend education, that go to TED Talks, that go to Davos, who meet public intellectuals, they also start making public policy. So this three-phase process that starts with the written word requires a sort of the interaction between thinkers and doers, if you like, feeds through to practice, which then reproduces itself. And it's this iterative process which has more or less led us to the place where, despite evidence to the contrary, we continue to make decisions about investment which don't seem to be especially grounded in reality. So what's the solution here? I think there's a kind of what we might call a weak form solution, which is we should become more critical of the notion of emerging markets. I have some thoughts about this in just a minute. And then I think there's a stronger form solution, which involves the more difficult and challenging way of changing the discourse on emerging markets itself. And I also have some thoughts about that. So if we take the weak form solution, we can look at the concept of emerging markets across a number of aspects, a number of sort of dimensions. I think the first thing is emerging markets it's a pretty vague idea, and it's used in a fairly vague way. I mean, the most typical way we think about emerging markets is this measure of GDP growth higher than the world average. And I think that's a fundamentally flawed and simplistic definition, right? So perhaps we can include more fine-grained, more interacting variables alongside kind of traditional institutional development arguments to define emerging markets. For example, there's this very big literature on what we call institutional voids, you know, that essentially the difference between a developing economy and a developed economy is that developed economies have very strong institutions which enable firms to execute their business strategies. I don't challenge that claim, but I think we can go beyond that and develop a more fine-grained approach. I think the second aspect, we overemphasize this term emergence. One of the most common questions I get from executives in the classroom when I talk about emerging markets is they say, Professor, when is my country going to emerge? Right. And it's, and that's a kind of difficult question to answer. And typically the answer I give is a kind of, stopgap answer, as I say, well, if you're from Central and Eastern Europe and you're not a member of the European Union, once you join the EU, maybe you've emerged. And then, of course, the immediate response is, yeah, but Professor, look what's going on in Bulgaria, look what's going on in Hungary. And you can suddenly see there are a whole bunch of problematic things with that idea. So I think maybe we can just ditch the concept of emerging markets and just be descriptive, talk about growth markets, economic growth markets, keep it simple. I think there's also a bit of a homogeneity effect with emerging markets. So we tend to sort of lump countries as diverse as China with Slovenia, right? As if somehow they're all kind of emerging markets. And I think it's really important to kind of differentiate between smaller, mid-sized and larger emerging markets, right? So, business strategies for a country the size of Malaysia may not necessarily be the same kind of business strategies that you would try to use in a country the size of India, right? So in the latter case of very large emerging markets, maybe focusing more on regions, clusters, specific cities rather than countries might be, I think, a more sort of fine-grained, useful way of thinking about investment opportunities in developing countries. I think much of the discourse around emerging markets is driven by people based in developed countries. Now, these people, of course, may have come from a developing country, but I still think that, we tend to find ourselves viewing many of the issues of emerging markets through a developed country lens. So I think maybe we can actively involve emerging market research from scholars based in developing countries, who can challenge a number of implicit sort of Western biases about what they are. And I think, it's a corollary of the definitional problem. There's an over-reliance, I think, on macroeconomic growth aspects. So perhaps we can kind of consciously explore negative aspects of emergence, such as, when an economy gets richer, what we actually find, especially in kind of the middle income countries, higher corruption because there's more opportunities to be corrupt. There's more money flying around. We have to address questions of human rights abuses that are a feature of economic development, as countries move from perhaps, more agricultural societies towards more sort of manufacturing-based societies. And of course, in many developing countries, as they've gone on a path of economic development, we've seen increases in various measures of socioeconomic inequality. And again, I think that's something that we need to think carefully about. So that's my soft form solution. I think my hard form solution, basically, I think is a bit more difficult and perhaps a little more nuanced. I mean, one thing is the leading academic journals, who are at the very start, the written word, phase one of this process, should become much more receptive to critical perspectives on emerging markets, that kind of challenge conventional substantive and methodological approaches. So if you think about all of those journals that were publishing the 1,000 something plus papers, a lot of them are kind of accepting papers that fit into a certain kind of way of thinking about emerging markets, which is somewhat uncritical. I think when we think about phase two, the discursive interaction phase, I think we as educators can, incorporate more critical research on emerging markets and get senior executives and decision makers to think more carefully about the consequences of sort of liberalization, deregulation, the opening up of developing economies to world trade and investment. And I think also from a kind of public intellectual aspect, I think people that have a critical perspective on this should be much more proactive at organizing TED or TEDx type events, which kind of get the word out on the critical perspective. I think it's incredibly easy these days to develop podcasts and new social media channels, which can also help to get this critical perspective out more readily. That's it from me, folks. Thanks very much, and I'd be happy to receive any questions.
Any questions from the Vienna audience here? Evelina, do you have any questions? I mean, Yusuf mentioned Bulgaria. we have a Bulgarian here on the side if you want to add something to this perspective. Okay. Maciej, do you want to add something to Yusuf's? I'm pretty sure you want to add something.
Oh, I certainly want. This is such an interesting paper. Thank you so much, Joseph. But I was surprised because I'm thinking in many ways it's almost like it may be overly timid for my taste, because like what is missing here, and I wonder if it was on purpose or you simply would disagree. I mean, I would honestly characterize all this talk about emerging markets not only as uncritical, but as completely patronizing, yes, and kind of whitewashing the fact that a lot of the troubles of the non-Western world, emerging world, the root causes are incredible abuses throughout history of the West itself, yes? And so like, even if you, and for practical purposes, even if you replace emerging market with institutional voids, you still have this patronizing Western center anchor, because if it's a lacking institution, it's lacking compared to what? Yes, to to United States. Fine, there are some good things about the US, but you are probably much less likely to get shot in China than in Texas, US, right? So there are clearly some missing institutions in the US, such as reasonable gun regulation. So maybe the root cause is really treating the West, whatever is defined, and also you mentioned heterogeneity among emerging countries, but there is a huge heterogeneity among the West. Yes, compare Austria to United States. Who is the anchor, Sweden or the US? When we say West is the anchor, but there is the mythical West, the Wall Street Journal, idea of FT idea of the West, from which we then create an implicit hierarchy of junior students, senior students, more senior students, misbehaving students. Maybe that's the problem, no?
Great. Well, as ever, nuanced and thoughtful observations here, Maciej. I mean, this is, I may be on a Damascene conversion here, because as you know, I've been writing about emerging markets now for 2 decades. Yes, I mean, I think a lot of what you've said, I think, is just, is a fact. It's not a matter of opinion. And I think this overgeneralization and maybe kind of, slightly Occidentalist definition of development kind of sits there in the background of this entire discourse. I would say that your critique is an even stronger form critique than the one that I'm offering, which I think gets at the very essence of what we mean by economic development and capital accumulation. Because what you're suggesting is that there is no kind of ideal type model in theory of what is what is economic development and capital accumulation, and then in practice, even if there were this kind of ideal idea, the level of heterogeneity of countries that are so-called developed suggests that no single country sticks to that ideal type, right? So then it becomes really messy, because I think it effectively says that the entire notion of where businesses should invest cannot be that there are no guardrails. Essentially, there is no single solution. And I think for someone like me, who's been writing about this from both a sort of analytical and prescriptive approach, can be quite anxiety forming, because then it more or less sort of says, look back at your 20 years. Thanks very much.
What we can replace the notion of an endpoint or an anchor or a model with is the notion of trade-offs, yes? That basically there is a trade-off between more democracy and more autocracy, yes? There is a trade-off between, more entrepreneurial economy and more safety net, yes? That we are operating in a world where nobody will reach an ideal type, not because nobody is perfect, that would be trivial, but it's even more fundamental because the various aspects of what it means to be developed are in constant tension with each other, and you can't achieve them both at once, and you need to give up on one in order to get the other. And then we don't need to go from the kind of Anglo-American centrist patronizing to what I also see is a new fashion of this kind of anti-Americanism and anti-American patronizing, saying that everything in America is bad, and we feel kind of all better when we say it, yes. And we go to Davos, like we had highly publicized instances when people made a name by going to Davos and kind of offering those broad-based critiques. And this, to me, is the same methodology applied to, same wrong methodology applied to defend just another idea. Whereas I think the real problem that business leaders in practice have is that all those environments are built on trade-offs, and those trade-offs are real. They are not a form of political creation only, but they are just like real deep macroeconomic trade-offs that you take. And and countries try the best they can, yes, and some achieve a mix that is closer to what we believe is right. But there is no single end point. How about that?
I think it's even more worrying than that. I was recently working with a bunch of executives who are based in Africa, right? So from the Maghreb region through West Africa, Central Africa, and into the South. And I think that the experience that many of these executives have of being involved very closely with Chinese capital is that this notion of free market allocation of capital is problematic. That state-centered capital accumulation can actually be as effective in their context as privatization and deregulation. So, if a Chinese state-owned firm builds a state-of-the-art container port, which enables firms to kind of get goods out to market, that might actually be faster and more effective than if you deregulate your economy and sell yourself on CNN in 45-minute segments on invest in our country because we're a great place to invest. I'm not saying at all, by the way, that Chinese investment in Africa is a panacea. As many of the executives that I was working with pointed out, there's significant anger towards the Chinese as regards technology transfer and the number of Chinese skilled workers that are sent to Africa to do the work there. But there's definitely now, I think, a viable and credible alternative discourse which challenges, as you say, this kind of Anglo-American focused discourse.
Thank you very much. I think that we're perfect.
Wait. Chris actually wanted to ask a question.
Oh, sorry.
Just to try to contribute a bit from my experience, the data set of emerging markets to analyze is only so vast. Obviously, just returns in China, if we're talking about sort of a market cap weighted EM index, can be, really overwhelmed. Also just resource export dependence is a very big theme, and you have these kind of maybe near decade-long cycles of stronger and weaker prices that may call for particularly creative kind of analyses about different quartiles and segmenting the data set significantly, or you may just be stuck with sort of some individual and regional case studies sort of detailing returns and what factors went into them. I'm also thinking, as you were mentioning, Chinese capital and sort of state rather than kind of free market led investment programs, that's another major source of linkage where a surge in capital from China into Africa for kind of non-return driven ends may of course lead to kind of the destination countries really choking on the capital and having maybe poor returns per dollar, but still enjoyable gross total benefit to the destination economy. Anyway, just to throw out a few other complicating factors in the analysis.
I think this was a very interesting debate, and if you want to have more of this kind of interesting debate, feel free to apply for the Executive MBA. In every module, you will have the opportunity to actually enjoy debate like this on different subjects, of course. Thank you, Yusuf. Thank you so much for your keynote presentation. Thank you, Maciej, for joining us for the Q&A session. Thank you very much, Evelina, for joining us tonight. Good night, everybody, and thanks to those people who joined us online. Thank you and good night.